shrewd, sometimes we use that word in a good sense, somebody that's pretty savvy with something. But sometimes, and probably more often, when we think of a person that's shrewd, we think of a person that has knowledge, and they use it to their advantage, taking advantage of other people. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we have been looking at how God stabilizes believers. And beginning back in Romans chapter 12, we've been seeing the importance of believers who are stable, or all of us as believers, playing a role in God's process of stabilizing believers and not getting in the way, not causing additional problems. We looked last week here in Romans 16:17 that Paul warned the Romans to watch out for brothers that are causing problems in the body of Christ, that cause divisions. They don't care that some believers are immature and have problems. They want to do what they want to do. And as a result, they trip those believers up. And Paul says that they do not serve the Lord Christ. They're serving their own bellies. They're serving their own appetites. They're only concerned about what they can get. And so they use smooth talk and flattery to give these people the false impression that you're fine, you can do these things, it's okay, even though these believers cannot yet do it in faith. Which brings us to our verse today in verse 19, where Paul says, "Your obedience is known to all, and I rejoice over you. But I want you to be wise in what is good and innocent in what is evil." When he talks about this obedience is known, I believe he's talking in a general sense of these believers in Rome. In fact, I skipped over a large set of verses here in chapter 16 where Paul goes through and lists a number of people in the Roman church that he personally knows. And so he has this understanding of people that know truth and have demonstrated this obedience. But he also knows that in the Roman church, there are believers who aren't doing this, and there are believers who are struggling, that are weak in the faith. And he wants them all to remember this. So he says, your obedience is known to all. And literally that expression, known to all, is it is reached. We might say the news of that has reached to all these other people. That is, to all these other believers in other churches. They've heard about how these believers are responding over there. The significance or importance of this idea of obedience, if we go back over to Romans 1, was Paul said that was part of his apostleship. His apostleship was to bring about the obedience, and I would say that comes from faith among the Gentiles. And we saw this again over in Romans chapter 16, and this is verse 26. He says, this mystery has been made known to all the nations or Gentiles, leading to an obedience, and I would say from faith. In the contrast, just to help us remember what he means this in this context, an obedience that comes from faith, and I would take faith then to be what we call, fancy word, an ablative of source, for those of you know Greek, that if these believers could believe these promises that God has made to us, these promises that nothing can alter this relationship with God, that nothing can separate us from God's love, that we are not condemned, and if they could get those promises straight, they could obey then from that faith in those promises, rather than obeying, as they did under law, to avoid curses. So remember, the law encouraged obedience to, number one, earn blessings, and those blessings were material blessings, unlike our blessings that are spiritual in the heavenlies. Go look at Ephesians 1:3. We had a video on this probably last March. But secondly, that obedience under the law was to avoid the curses. And by curses, he was referring to illness, famine, loss of livestock, just all of this suffering, your enemies attacking you and taking your crops and taking away your children and such. These were the curses that were come upon them. And people could obey trying to avoid things. In fact, to this day, lots of Christians live their life trying to obey God to avoid getting in trouble. And that's not the motivation God desires. The motivation he desires us to have is to, by faith, take his promises seriously. And those promises are, as we've seen in here, that you can't do anything to technically damage this relationship with God. You might be ruining your experience of it by these activities so that you're not enjoying those benefits. In fact, when you're trying to obey out of fear that you're going to get in trouble, that's not really enjoying your relationship with God. You're operating on a level that God isn't primarily trying to motivate us with. And so he wants that kind of obedience. That kind of obedience. Now that brings us back then over here to chapter 15. He says that this obedience has been heard. In other words, there are people in the church that they have been obeying like that. That's a good thing. But then he says, but I want you to be wise in what is good. And that word wise means you know how to take what you know and put it into practice appropriately. You use it, you know when and how for the good, but innocent to what is evil. And that word innocent is the word, and this is important now. It's a word that meant not mixed together. That is, when they acted in such a way, that's exactly what they saw. They were just doing this properly with good. Back up here, you have these people using smooth talk and flattery. They don't have the best interest of these other people at heart. He just told us that they are serving not the Lord Christ, they're serving their own appetites. So these people, they are not innocent. They sound like they're saying nice things. You're good, you'll be okay. But they're not sincere. They have mixed, because that's the idea of this word innocent, is unmixed. They have mixed their motives. They've mixed the selfish motive of doing something for their benefit in what they're trying to communicate to these other people. And they're mixing, in this context here, they're mixing these things so that they're non-innocent in what is evil. And we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But they're shrewd. They're shrewd. They're saying these things that sell these people. They're selling them a slick line. Yeah, this thing has a lot of miles on it, but it's going to go forever. Think of, I hate to lump car salesmen in there, but you kind of think about that idea sometimes. But there's all kinds of people that exercise all kinds of ruthless shrewdness in their selfish ambition to achieve what's in their best, what they think is in their best interest. And we ought to be those that are wise. Hopefully that we're those that are expressing obedience from faith, and we really want what's best for others, not just looking out for ourselves, not doing that, because we want to have a good day in the Lord, and we want to encourage others to have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me today.